When you think of unlicensed or bootleg video games, the NES comes to mind. This is understandable because the console does have a ton of both, but the NES wasn't the only console that had these types of games. One company in particular was responsible for a bunch of bootleg Genesis games. Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Pojer coming at you with another video. Alright, so if you've seen a couple of my videos and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. Trying to see if we can get to 40,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Maybe it's possible. And check out our Discord server, discord.pojer.net. Alright, let's talk about some Genesis bootleg games. What exactly is a bootleg, and how is it different from an unlicensed game? The term unlicensed is used when a game is published without the console manufacturer's knowledge. Unlicensed games are completely original properties that are legal to produce. The console manufacturer also has every right to block unlicensed games from working on their hardware. A bootleg is a type of unlicensed game, but these typically use stolen properties. This means that either the graphics, music, or IPs are stolen from somewhere else. Of course, this is illegal, which means the game company could get in trouble for producing it. To get around potential legal trouble, these companies will usually go under aliases. Sometimes it's not always known who developed some bootleg games. The NES happens to have a lot of unlicensed and bootleg games. Part of this is due to the popularity of the console. Companies are going to want to make games for a console that many people own so that they get more exposure. The other part is Nintendo's strict policies. Making games officially was expensive because you had to pay for some of the manufacturing costs. You could also only make 5 games per year and had to sign an exclusivity agreement with Nintendo. Many companies didn't like these rules, and some would make unlicensed games instead. While the NES was a big target for many bootleg games, it wasn't the only console to receive them. Somewhere around 1993, the company Gamtech began developing games. For the most part, they were a contract developer, which meant they made games for other companies to publish. Because of this, they were not always credited for the games they developed, so it's unknown exactly how many games they developed. There's a few that we know for a fact they made, but then there's a few that we're not 100% sure about. Despite the NES being the target for many bootleg companies, Gamtech only actually developed 5 known NES games. In Fire Dragon, you extend your body by grabbing the fireballs on the stage. It's nothing more than a game of Snake. Not good, not bad. In Wisdom Boy, you're given a bunch of pieces on the right side and you must fit all of them on the stage. Both of these games are types of things you would see on a flip phone and nothing special, but they're playable. Their run on the NES was short-lived in terms of game count, but they had a much bigger presence on the Genesis. A common tactic of many bootleg companies was to port over games that were popular on other consoles. Sometimes even console-exclusive games will be brought over, like Super Mario World on the NES. This was an interesting strategy. Maybe you'll buy the bootleg version of a game if you can't afford the real one. Let's take a look at some of Gamtech's Genesis games. Here's Bomboy. It's a top-down perspective, and you must destroy all the enemies on the screen and then find the exit. You can drop bombs, which explode in a cross pattern. The bombs hurt the enemies, but they can also hurt you, so you have to be careful on where you place them. This is obviously a Bomberman clone with nothing particularly original about it. All of the power-ups in this game are exactly the same as the ones from Bomberman. The graphics are good, and when you make it to a new world, you're greeted to new graphics, which is nice. But there's no horizontal scrolling like the original Bomberman, it's all on a single screen. The level design can also be weird at times. In one stage, you're immediately placed next to an enemy. That's not fair. It's a good game, but that's because Bomberman is good. Let's try Adventurous Boy. It's a defender-type game where you have to destroy all the enemy bases to complete the level. You're able to move both left and right, and when you do complete the task, you fight a boss. Periodically, a story icon will show up where you can purchase items. With a name like Adventurous Boy, I was expecting an Adventure Island clone, but it's actually a clone of Fantasy Zone. Why is it called Adventurous Boy? The game does look nice graphically, but the controls are terrible. There's some weird scrolling glitch where your character moves very slow when the screen is moving. One thing I do like though is that when you die, you start right where you left off. This would be an alright game, but the controls really ruin it for me. I'm not sure why they even bothered making this game when the Genesis got Super Fantasy Zone, which is a far better game. Let's try Super Tank War. You play as a tank and you must defeat all the enemy tanks to beat the level. You also must defend the statue at the bottom of the screen. There's items you can collect that help you out along the way. The developers successfully copied Battle City on the Famicom. Unfortunately, they did not bring over the best feature of that game. You cannot create your own levels in Super Tank War. It's an alright game, but Battle City is better. I can understand why they brought this game over because it was previously a Famicom game and there was never a Genesis version, but a game like this is a bit too simplistic for an advanced console like this. Here's Lion King 2. Interesting that both young and adult Simba are on the title screen. I guess it could be two different lions. It's obviously very similar to the official Lion King game from Virgin. Simba can actually swat at enemies unlike the original game. If you collect one of the stars, you become adult Simba, but if you get hit, you transform back into young Simba. That definitely didn't happen in the movie. The game has similar climbing mechanics as the original game, where you can move upwards to reach a higher platform. The levels are completely different though, and certainly don't look like any Lion King movie I've ever seen. Have you ever seen a lion roaming around China? The game is extremely glitchy. A few times I fell through the wall and landed somewhere I didn't want to be. In one playthrough, I fell through the floor and ended up at the beginning of the level, so basically I had to start over. That's not fair. Some platforms will just magically appear somehow. Did you see that? The sound effects they went with are really strange. Overall, this is a very sloppy game. There's also Lion King 3. It's unknown whether Gametech was involved with this one. There's a few improvements. Now you can select whether you want to play as young or adult Simba rather than just magically transforming. The graphics are also brighter and more colorful. Most of the enemies are sprites that were stolen from Donkey Kong Country and other games. The programming seems to be better too because I didn't fall through any walls during my entire playthrough. The music is also very good, with one song being very similar to another bootleg Lion King game we talked about several videos back. The game even has stage bosses, which is more than what the last game can say. The game still doesn't seem to follow the movie at all, at least not any Lion King movie I've ever seen. I don't remember this bear being in the movie. I didn't even know they were in the same geographical location. The climbing controls are worse than the last game. It's near impossible to swing off platforms and it requires many tries. In one part of the game, you have to successfully time multiple of these swings in a row. Sometimes foreground graphics blend in with the backgrounds, like in this auto-scroller. It makes it very difficult to see what you're able to land on. I dislike both games, but I do think Lion King 3 is slightly better. It's interesting they made these games considering it's on the same console as the official version. In both cases, they did give us something much different. Here's Squirrel King. Supposedly this is an actual copy of the game, but this might be a reproduction. I bought this off eBay several years back. You play as either Chip or Dale, neither of which are squirrels, and you just have to walk to the right to beat the stage. You pick up boxes and throw them at enemies. You can also throw fireballs, but only temporarily. These are your only ways of attacking, so it's best to save the fireballs for when you absolutely need them. I personally like to save them for the boss and then just fire at them one at a time. The game has both horizontal and vertical scrolling segments. The game is loosely based off the Chip and Dale NES game. In those games, you can also pick up and throw objects. Even though it's inspired by that game, there's a lot of originality here. The graphics are bright and colorful and don't appear to be stolen from another game. The music is also excellent. Some tracks are clearly ripped from other games though. The game is also surprisingly fun. I actually enjoyed playing through this one. But you can still tell this is a bootleg. Moving platforms tend to be very glitchy in this game. When you're on one, you're completely locked in place while the screen is moving. In the vertical segments, the screen doesn't scroll up when you're on a moving platform, which is a huge oversight on the developer's part. For unlicensed game standards though, this is a surprisingly good game. It was very smart that Gametech brought this game over. Not only did Chip and Dale never receive a Genesis game, but Capcom didn't have much of a presence on the console in general. There's another bootleg that's a ROM hack of Squirrel King called Super Mario World. We do get a new title screen, and the first two worlds have been changed to Mario-themed ones. The graphics were obviously modeled after Super Mario All-Stars, but otherwise the gameplay and mechanics are the same. It's a little unusual seeing Mario pick up and throw boxes rather than running around and hitting coin blocks. The first two bosses were replaced with Bowser, both of which are exactly the same. Once you complete the first two worlds, the rest of the stages are the same as Squirrel King. For whatever reason, the publishers decided to troll the customer by showing the second stage of Squirrel King on the box, which is not in the Mario version. Good job, guys. I prefer the original game, but this version is more well known. It's unknown whether Gametech was behind this hack or not. Speaking of Super Mario World, there's a port of the Super Nintendo game called Super Mario World 64. This is another game that's not confirmed to be made by Gametech. On the NES, the company Hummer Team made their own version of Super Mario World, and it was ambitious. A decent amount of levels were included, and there was an overworld map. Nearly every feature from the original was implemented in the NES game. That is not at all the case with the Genesis one. The graphics are the same, but that's the only thing they got right. There's only 6 levels, which is a huge departure from the Super Nintendo's 72 or even the NES version's 27. Mario has very poor acceleration, which means it takes him a while to get a running start. There's points in the game where you can't see ahead and you have no choice but to make a leap of faith. A bunch of aspects have not been implemented. The Koopas don't drop their shells when you defeat them. There's mushroom blocks, but they never become fire flowers, although there are cape upgrades. There's no Yoshi in this game whatsoever. Overall, this is a very lousy bootleg. Considering how ambitious the NES bootleg was, I thought that Genesis would get something better than this garbage. There's also Super Donkey Kong 99. This is actually a pretty interesting one. If you ever wanted to know if the Donkey Kong Country games would be possible on the Genesis, we can now confirm that it's not. This is a very sloppy version of the game. Donkey Kong is the only playable character, and you die in one hit. There's no dash attack, so you can only destroy enemies by jumping on them. Listen to the music. Does this sound like Donkey Kong Country? A few times during my playthrough, the game randomly crashed. Yeah, that's great. Because you have less ways to kill enemies and you die in one hit, this is a very annoying and frustrating game to play. I do not recommend. I just wanted to give you a breakdown of some of the bootleg games on the Genesis. Most of Gametech's titles are the typical low-quality bootlegs that we commonly see, but there's a couple alright ones out there like Squirrel King. Despite using a lot of assets and stealing the core concept of games, a lot of Gametech's titles went into different directions, except for the last two I covered. Lion King 2 had completely different stages and a few unique gameplay changes. Squirrel King had some original graphics and music and was only loosely based off the NES game. With some small changes, this could have passed as an original game. A lot of bootlegs will copy the original game verbatim, but Gametech was creative. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.